السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I would like to welcome everyone to the Oman Association for Quality of Higher Education webinar series. I would also like to introduce and welcome Mr. Badr Al-Ma'mari from the Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation to our board. General House rules, please use the Q&A for questions and interventions. We will have a 20-minute Q&A session at the end of the presentation. The OQHE has organized a series of webinars to support the sectors for quality practices in higher education. We have invited different national and international experts to discuss specific topics common to all of us. We have asked Dr. Jocha Al-Jukairi, also from the Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation, to discuss the ministry's views and future plans. We have collaborated with CLIPS. Dr. Nariman presented to us a topic of student engagement in government responsiveness. We've also collaborated with Dr. Rima Zijali and Dr. Bushra Hasni to discuss with us utilizing data for informed decision making. Today we collaborate with the firm for business and economic consulting to shed light on alignment of higher education strategies with Vision 2040. Allow me to introduce to you our guest, His Highness Sayyid Dr. Adham Al-Saeed. Dr. Adham is an assistant professor of economics at Sultan Qaboos University. He's the managing partner and co-founder of the firm for business and economic consulting. He is the Board of Trustees chair on the Scientific College of Design as well as Muscat College. He's been involved with policy and strategy advisory for several governmental bodies. He had published several and worked on several economic studies. However, specifically projects that he worked for higher education includes the role of higher education in achieving Sustainability Goals 2030, design of higher education entrepreneurship required course guidelines that he developed, which all HEIs now have implemented this course, entrepreneurship course. The role of endowment in supporting and funding education symposium he participated, organized by the Educational Council. Contemporary Omani economy and future developments, reflections on education and employment, also organized by the Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation. And then mapping of the SMEs ecosystem in the Sultanate of Oman. He participated in a study to capture the ecosystem of the SMEs in Oman. Dr. Adham, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muna, and dear colleagues. If you allow me just to start to share my screen. I hope it's clear to everyone. Right. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Muna, for the kind invitation. And obviously the Association of Quality in Higher Education, as well as the board and all of the participants. It's a great pleasure to basically discuss some of my thoughts with you on aligning higher education strategies with Vision 2040. And perhaps I should give a bit of a backgrounder to this concept, where I have been involved in sort of economic and social advisory at the levels of the Ministry of Economy and the organization of the Vision 2040 with many, many people, and perhaps some of you were there as well. And We were involved at various levels at either engaged as stakeholders or participants in the advisory elements of that project. And since 2016 until the release of the official document last year with the endorsement and attestation of His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq, which made the Vision 2040 an official document that guides the Omani economy, people, institutions, and all stakeholders towards what we believe will put Oman and place Oman into advanced economy in the future, inshallah. I use the word economy loosely here because Vision 2040, obviously, as I will talk about, is more than just economics. And more recently at the firm, which is a small consulting firm where we look at strategies and we look at assisting different organizations through their processes and business models, whether you are in the service sector or in the education sector or any other sectors. And we thought it would be about time that we help these organizations align themselves. We start at the very high level because we understand many organizations have worked a lot on their internal strategies and processes, and we provide an assisting hand. I've also been involved with higher education as an academic at Sultan Qaboos University, but as Dr. Muna had also mentioned, the board of trustees of two specialty organizations, the Scientific College of Design and Muscat College as well. And in both cases, as a role of chair there in the board of trustees, that gave me the opportunity to also reflect on what I've learned about 2040 and participating there and what the organizations are trying to achieve. And today I hope to take this to a higher level and look at the higher education overall and help sort of understand what are the linkages beyond the typical kind of strategy discussion that you might have with your board of trustees and with your board of directors and various stakeholders. Right. So before we start, can I ask Juliet to first start with the first poll question, just to kind of get you thinking about what is it we are trying to do here today, while I just preview or overview what I will chat about today, inshallah ta'ala. So the first poll question basically is trying to understand how much you understand about 2040. Is it a strategy, is it an action plan, or is it a guiding vision? If you take a moment, please, to take the poll, and then I'll ask Juliet to reflect back on the results. So Juliet, once you have enough respondents, please do display the results. Thank you. Okay, Juliet, I think we've given enough time for the poll. All right, so most of you believe that it's either a strategy or a guiding vision, and a few believe it's an action plan. Let's hope we can explain the differences of what each one of these elements affect or reflect on, if I may say so. So I'm going to start with trying to preview very briefly what Vision 2040 is, because a lot of people discuss 2040 but do not completely comprehend how does it relate to them and why is it important. I'll talk a little bit about the challenges of how I see them for higher education institutes and higher education generally. And then finally, I'll talk about how might we think about this alignment process and how do we improve our own strategies to better fit the vision. So Vision 2040, when it was first conceived, it was believed to be the next transition for the next 20 years after the completion of the previous vision. Now, within the visioning process, there is a lot of talk about whether these visions are strategies, whether these visions are guiding visions in themselves and kind of a compass, as I'd like to think of it, for the future, or are they really actionable plans that we can work on almost immediately? Now, let's think of this as a long-term process. So there's a lot of questions about what do we want for the future. And to do that in Oman, we focused with a large group of stakeholders across various geographical regions in Oman, between youth, between middle-aged individuals, professionals, the elderly, civil society, educational institutes, whomever you may think of, businesses, have all been involved in the process, extensive engagement through town hall style meetings across the country. And that kind of helped us focus on 4 major areas that Vision 2040 basically stands on. And that is displayed here as society and people. We look at the economy, institutions, and the environment. And what we mean by that is these are kind of the broad level directions that we would like Oman to be at in the future, 20 years from now. Right? Doesn't mean that we don't start working on it today, obviously, but that's the ultimate goal. So we want a society with creative individuals, with as much value that the word creation or creativity has with it as we think about what does creativity mean and talent. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We're talking about a competitive economy and all of the things that are encompassed in the word competitive economy. And then we're talking about an environment that is sustainable in its components from both the production side and the use side on the sort of utilization of resources and the availability of resources, not only for this generation, but the future generations. And then finally, and very importantly, responsible state agencies, where there is some level of governance that is very, very important for us to maintain, to make sure that all of these things weave together. These particular pillars become very, very critical to understanding how relevant are we as organizations. And when we're talking about higher education, where are the relevant areas that we can add value and connect to this vision? So in this case, it is very important to realize that those 4 pillars are guided by national priorities within each one of them. So if you notice, I've taken the color coding from the vision document itself. So I take no credit if you like it or you don't. But the idea here is that there are certain national priorities that are connected to those pillars. And these national priorities are very high level, one might think of as principles that we would like to have at the end of the path in 20 years' time. Now, I've marked 2 relevant ones here, which I think are very relevant to our discussion, but this is not to isolate that higher education is relevant to many of these. But directly, the national priorities that affect higher education are the people and society elements, where we talk about education, health, social welfare, citizenship, well-being. We talk about education, learning, scientific research, and national capabilities. On the other side, in the bottom part of these national priorities, we have the labor market and employment, which are also very relevant because of the outcomes of higher education and the impact. This is not to say that the environment, the governance of state institutions, economic factors such as the private sector participation, cooperation, economic diversification are not relevant, but I've highlighted these as the highest national priorities. Why am I interested in these national priorities? Because these national priorities help us in thinking about where do we belong within this vision. Clearly, every stakeholder has a place in this vision. And for higher education, at least from my perspective, these are some of the critical national priorities that we need to keep in mind as we start to think about how we move forward. So the vision itself has these priorities, and within each one of these national priorities, there are very high level values. So for example, in the labor market, there's aspiration to have 40% of the private sector employment being Omani. Whether that's a reasonable target or not, only time will tell, obviously. In health, we are looking at the quality of health provided, universal health, and there'll be some measures for that. However, I should be very careful to warn that we should not have KPIs for national priorities, but at least we have some guiding indicators to see whether we are reaching that level or not. Now, within this perspective of national priorities, we should also be aware that they're connected to the social development or the sustainable development goals 2030. So in many elements, if you go back to the document, you see a lot of parallels between the 17 goals set for the international community that are also being linked to Oman's vision. So we're not very far from that. So if you've done any work in your organization or in sort of in higher education with respect to SDGs 2030, you'll find a lot of relevance that you can also bring in to your discussions and strategy as well. Now, I'll talk about those specific national priorities because they are very relevant to us, but I've highlighted some of their sub-strategic goals, if you like. Each one of these national priorities comes with a guiding statement. So in the education and learning and scientific research, we're looking at inclusive education, lifelong learning, scientific research, knowledge-based society, and competitive national talents. And I'll focus on competitive national talents because the first couple of pointers, I'm sure every one of you has heard of, discussed, has made some contribution there. These are your typical operational kind of objectives that you usually have built into your strategies. But this competitive, the national competitive talent, if you like, is the one I've highlighted at the bottom right. These are all from the national document, by the way, which are available at the 2040 website. Now, why am I focused on this? Because I believe as higher education, one of your key stakeholders, not the only, but key stakeholders, are the youth that come through your doors, through your classrooms, through your online courses or whatever. And 2040 is built around the elements of innovation, talent, and creativity, creative society, competitive society, innovative society. And in this case, one of the sub-goals that are critically important to keep in mind is creating a national or a pool of national talent, if you like, that is indicated at the bottom of the screen at the right. Dynamic capability with skills that are competitive. This is not to detract from the importance of the other sub-goals, such as high quality educational system and a system that empowers human capabilities, effective national system that nurtures scientific research. Those are very, very important characteristics and important goals that we also need to focus on. But I've picked the one that I want to build on a little bit later in a few slides' time. All right, so if this is one of the national priorities, how do we manage the labor market one? Because one would think that the labor market isn't the domain of higher education necessarily, but more like the Ministry of Labor and government policies and economic conditions, which is also true. But from a national perspective and the visioning of 2040, we are looking to have a dynamic labor market that attracts talent and keeps up with demographic, economic, knowledge, and technological changes. And I'll focus on the word talents, demographic, economic knowledge, and technological changes. And that's exactly what we want to focus on if we're looking at higher education, where labor market with skilled, productive workforce and positive work culture. And that does not necessarily get built only when you go to the job market. That gets built up before that, and that's why I highlight it here. So if you agree with me that those national priorities are very important for businesses to align themselves with, and higher education to align themselves with, and government institutions to align themselves with, then we need to start to ask ourselves, how are we going to do that? What are we going to do? This is a big agenda. Can any sector or organization be a champion and a leader in this? Perhaps in some cases, but in most cases we find ourselves needing to focus somewhere within this vision to understand how do we contribute and how do we align ourselves to it. So Vision 2040 is more than simply a guide. It's more than simply a strategy. In fact, it isn't a strategy. It is effectively telling us what we would like to do. The rest of the hard work about how we're going to do it really comes through in the 5-year development plan, the 10th plan, for example, at this point, but also in the organizations that are planning to find how do they connect to this vision. So I would lean more on the guiding vision to tell us what we would like to do. So next time when you start to talk about Vision 2040 within your organization, within higher education associations or whatnot, one needs to ask, what are we talking about specifically? Are we talking about the big vision to be in, competing with advanced economies, or are we looking at more specific sort of strategic national priorities? And that's where we place ourselves, and that's where we find ourselves relevant. The key word here is relevant. To what degree are you relevant? But before we link ourselves to the vision, I'd like to bring forth challenges that I believe set the tone to how we talk about aligning ourselves to Vision 2040. And in this case, the current challenges really come from the key issues that I believe are challenging higher education in Oman, and then challenging the economy itself as a result, and the opportunities it creates. And it also affects many other parts of the economy, as you'll see in the next few slides. So what are these key issues? First, we look at the skills and talent issue. There's a lot of discussion whether we have the right skills or not. There's a challenge of employability and entrepreneurship. While these two things are related in some way, but they're obviously very separate, where in entrepreneurship, you're taking matters into your own hand, creating your own opportunities. And in employability, you're really depending on what you receive in higher education and then what you get out of. So that input-output kind of process that happens and whether that fits into the labor market. Obviously, quality is a big issue, and how output of this whole educational system, higher education system, whether it is where we want it to be or where there are issues that need to be addressed. Collaboration and R&D, and here I'm thinking more about how are we collaborating with stakeholders, especially in the private sector. So the innovation element of it, whether the Omani higher education system is hitting the mark with the educational perspective. And finally, and I think very, very importantly, is a sustainability element as well. Is the higher education system sustainable? Does it work very well, as we'll later talk about 2040? Or do we need to work more on that as we strategize forward? So let's start with the skills. So from the surveys that are available from the Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation and Research, graduates and employers have been surveyed in various years. Unfortunately, many of these still need to be updated, but at least they give us some perspective. Graduates have reported that the skills that they have most deficiencies with when they leave higher education are English language proficiency, written and spoken, practical specialization knowledge, whether you are in engineering or whether you are in economics or whether you're in accounting. They know the theory, but not the practice as much. And the other one is the problem solving, right? There's a long list of issues there, but these were the highest levels of deficiency within those surveys when surveyed by the ministry in 2019. The employer survey is a bit older, but still sheds interesting light on some of the skill gaps that are perceived by employers or the private sector, right? Language is right at top, then coping with workplace pressure and communication skills, right? But there's a lot of similarities when you look at the longer list, but I highlighted the top three to kind of ask the question, do we have a skills gap? And if the skills gap is a real gap or a perceived gap? It would seem, at least when we ask graduates and businesses about some of these gaps, there seems to be common issues. Language is an issue. The softer skills, if you like, or the skills of what are considered critical today are still, such as problem solving, communication skills. Time management also gets reported high up there as well, and work ethics as well. So these issues are there and perhaps may have changed, may have not. We need to look deeper into that. However, I looked at some of the international indices, and there's so many of them. So I picked one that is used within the 2040 framework of measuring what talent we have now and what we will have in the future. And we have the Global Talent Competition Index, which compares each country's capabilities of producing skills, whether it's in knowledge, whether to attract skills or whether to enable them, vocational skills versus other skills. And this is the image that is produced for Oman in 2019-2020. And I'm sure you already noticed that the deficiency in Oman in terms of having global knowledge skills and vocational and technical skills are weaker than the income group that Oman is placed in, which is middle or high income group of countries. So it seems that Oman is able to attract talent, but is unable to necessarily grow it and retain it domestically. So I use this as a soft indicator that there is an issue of skills. Perhaps it's perceived, perhaps we're not communicating it well, or perhaps more problematically, we are not producing the right skills or elevating would be the inputs into the higher education system to the skill level that is required and needed to compete not only domestically, but internationally. Now, the next issue is employability. And this is the thorniest of issues for our higher education system and then the labor market, as I've highlighted those earlier in our national priorities. So if you ask graduates, about 50 to 60% of them believe that their specializations or qualifications from the higher education system in Oman helps them in the workplace. So it's relevant to them, which is a positive sign, at least from the get-go, that we are being about 50 to 60% relevant. However, we don't prepare those would-be job seekers or those who seek employment in the correct manner. They are still using conventional personal ways of finding work. So much of the work that many of the higher education institutes try to do for alumni to connect them with job or career advisory, etc., is not really bearing fruit from the perspective of the graduates or job seekers. Again, this is from the survey that is conducted by the Ministry of Higher Education. And in most cases, job seekers usually, and interestingly, complain about specialization, experience, and interview recalls as being the challenges of finding jobs, which contradicts what we see up there in the 50 and 60% one would say, overlap of qualifications and market needs. Now, if we look a little bit closer at job seekers and why are they being unemployed, there are many reasons, and depends who you ask will give you some reason or another, but we know that the youth category between the age of 20 to 29 are the biggest share. We know that most of these are diploma holders and bachelor's or higher, so they're moving up from being less educated to more educated, which is a challenge for higher education in Oman. Why are highly educated individuals facing these issues? And then the specializations that are most unemployed are business studies, engineering, and information technology, which are perceived to be more employable in any market. So we go back to the skills argument that there could be an issue with skills or perception or others. But again, if you look at the right panel with the pie charts comparing males and females in terms of why can't they find jobs, again, experience tends to be the highest and specialization. So how do we manage this? There's a lot of talk about how training can help. The survey itself, the same survey, finds that training in itself isn't a deciding factor. It's a helping factor to find a job, but isn't a deciding factor as well. So there are a lot of issues that are challenging young people today to find jobs and become employable, not only from the skills element, but from the other element that is perhaps less in control of higher education in Oman. But still, I believe there is a role to be played there. Now, the other element I mentioned was entrepreneurship, right? And as you're well aware that Oman has taken off in this element of SME development and entrepreneurship development since 2013, where it has placed programs, government support, financial, it has introduced specific courses in higher education since 2015 to enrich the entrepreneurship education, which we hope would translate into more people taking risk. According to the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor survey, which was conducted in Oman in connection with the University of Nizwa, the Oman since 2019 to 2020, when surveyed, people have indicated that entrepreneurial education has actually improved in the organizations, higher education organizations, which may have very well affected their willingness to start up their own businesses. Obviously, the pandemic aside, because the pandemic had serious issues on people, which changed their behavior, but there was some improvement there. But as you note, in many of the other elements, Oman is either on par or laggard in some cases compared to other countries that are also compared across the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. Now, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor is a measure of willingness to take that risk, given the different environments, the institutional, the educational. But this, I think, is a positive sign, at least at the moment, that we are moving in the right direction. We're not there yet. We're still somewhere midway between where we can be at the higher level compared to other countries. But I believe this is a positive sign. But nonetheless, we are finding that still more people would like to find employment and comparably less people want to start up their own businesses at some stage or the other. But I would take this with a grain of salt because these are opinions of people when asked, and it could be attitudes rather than actions taken. Quality. The other challenge with quality is, how do we measure quality, right? Whether we measure it through institutional standards like the OAAA, for example, or the qualification frameworks or whatever you work on. But what we find here is a snapshot of the Global Innovation Index. And this kind of gives us a broader picture of the country and the inputs into the innovation black box and what comes out of it, if you like. And one of the things we hear from students in the same survey I've mentioned earlier is they lack greater participation in academic engagements. They would like to see more improvement in practical knowledge versus theoretical knowledge, and they would like to be more involved in research projects and research type activities. Now, this is the students or the graduates' perspective. Now, is that really causing an issue? If we look at the Global Innovation Index for 2020, Oman ranks 84th from 131 countries. If you look at the human capital and research, Oman is laggard in blue, right in the middle, to its countries that are in similar standards of income in the region, in North Africa and West Asia, right? We don't have problems as much with infrastructure as much as with the knowledge and technology outputs and the creative outputs as well. So it would seem to me, at least at a very high level, that there is much to be done by higher education in Oman to strengthen, one, the input, the human capital elements, but also the outputs of knowledge and creativity into our system. But this does not happen alone. This will require collaborations, if you like, with other factors or other players. And this is where the role of the private sector comes in and the challenge, how do we work with the private sector? The higher education system in Oman tends to focus more on the students and on the research elements because that is a requirement by the regulators such as the Ministry of Higher Education with the institutional frameworks and the standards required of them. And this kind of comes up very high when we talk to employers or when the ministry talks to employers and they get told that most of the collaborations are focused either on training or employment and much less so on research and development. Again, this picture is repeated from the previous slide just to highlight the connection where we have lower business sophistication, lower knowledge and technology outputs, and human capital. Those are linked hand in hand between the quality of our output, whether it is research, whether it is human capital, whether it is technological advancements, and the interest of the private sector, as it were, and the challenges there. So kind of what is the takeaway message from these challenges? Well, up to this challenge, we find that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to build on the national priorities that I've mentioned earlier, the collaborations that are needed to produce the results or the desired results that we would like. Sustainability, and sustainability is perhaps one of the key driving elements here because it affects everything that we've talked about in the last couple of minutes, right? We know that the pandemic has accelerated a number of changes in our systems. First of all, across the world, the demand for higher education has taken a new shape. Perhaps not so much in Oman as much as countries where you pay out of pocket, people are questioning whether I should go to this university or that university, sit it online or attend. What do I want from a university degree? And whether the online models are beginning to change, right? Industry is also asking questions. What do we want from graduates? What do we want from people? Are they prepared to work in the new models, the hybrid models? Are we going to invest in people? Are we going to support universities or colleges? Or are we going to develop our own centers of excellence, as we see many organizations doing so and internalizing the learning process? Financing challenges, as you're well aware, that public finance has been supporting universities, especially in Oman, but in many other countries. But governments are beginning to prioritize and ask questions as well. What do we want from higher education? Can we support higher education? Or can we create alternative finance measures such as private sort of funding or any type of funding that would work through endowments or whatnot? these challenges are with us and they're going to start to affect us as well. And then perhaps more importantly is, how are we going to be skilling the jobs of the future, or the people who are going to be working in those jobs? Are we going to still be the traditional 4 to 5 year model that we use currently in Oman? You go through your foundations and your specializations or whatnot. Or are we going to look at smaller, shorter courses, different type of certifications? This also goes to the institutions that regulate. Are we still going to ask people to do classwork to be able to certify them, or are we going to ask them to do different types of activities as well? How are the standards and academic standards, institutional standards, going to change as a result of that? There is some indication, at least by the surveys that we've seen, that there's more need for vocational and technical knowledge, but not in the traditional sense alone, but now we're going to look at vocations that are very, very specific. We need people in programming. We're going to focus on programming. We're going to need people in specific design elements or analysis, data analysis. So that's going to change a lot of the ways that we're going to do it. But is this business model change catching on at the moment or not? It really depends how long are we going to feel the sort of the aftermath of the pandemic, and whether we're able to go as business as usual or perhaps new business models. Right. So before I move on to this, perhaps Juliet, can we have the next poll on alignment between higher educational strategies and Vision 2040, please? All right, Juliet, when we've had a good amount of responses, please display the results. Thank you. All right, so the majority, 60%, believe that you are somewhat aligned within higher education or the institute to Vision 2040, and 40%, which is a good percentage, very well. And there's 0% on not at all. And I wonder if we're going to change our mind in the next few slides. All right, thank you, Juliet, for that. Right, so how do we align ourselves? Given the challenges, given our understanding of Vision 2040 and the national priorities, how are we going to assign or align ourselves to that? So let me just go back to the basics of the strategic cascade. I'm sure all of you are aware of this, but this is just a quick reminder. On the left-hand side, what you have is your typical, whether you're a business, whether you're a nonprofit, whatever you are, you have a nice little kind of conical focused, starting from your vision, mission, and values, and then you go to your strategic goals, what you would like to do, and then you've got your specific, sort of more focused strategies, and then you have goals set for those strategies, and then you have your action plans which execute on that, right? And you report on these operational plans on an annual basis, and there'll be a lot of questions of why this was achieved, and you'll have your dashboards and your traffic lights. That's all fair and well, and that's very useful for us because that's what we're used to, that's what we use continuously. But the question is, how does that all work in connection with the vision? And this is what we have on the right-hand side, is kind of the cascade for the visions, kind of where it lies, and how might you start to think about where your organization fits into the big picture, right? So we started the national priority at the top, and we've isolated one or two of those, one for the education and one for the labor market, and then we have the strategic direction, right? So we would like inclusive education, creating talent and whatnot, right? And under each one of those, we had objectives, and we picked the talent one under education, right? We could have we could map a lot of these on various different cascades, right? But just to keep life simple at the moment, I would like to focus on the strategic direction, which we picked up, education, all right? And then we pick one of the key objectives that we want to start to focus on and start to ask ourselves, how is our vision, strategic goals, strategies, and all of these working towards that specific national objective, right? And sometimes some of these objectives are easy and built into our own organization. If you're going to create talent or help develop talent, that's part and parcel of your business model, if I may say so. However, that's not enough. You need to ask yourselves, how are you going to link that to the ultimate objective or the national priority at the higher level, right? And it's easier said than done. I've seen a lot of strategies where people saying, we're doing this because of Vision 2040, but they cannot answer how they're going to do it, why are they doing it in the first place, and what kind of results do they expect at the end of the road. If it's business as usual and what you do within your business, that's not going to be necessarily, doesn't need a strategy. It's just you need to make sure that the quality element of the outputs are there. But if it's going to be a shift towards improving employability, then you need to have very specific strategic objectives that are going to link to the national talent objective that you have. And notice here, I've excluded the performance indicators at the higher level of the national, because those you're not responsible for. That is the responsibility of the 2040 office to make sure all of the organizations in Oman will lead to it. So it's a collective measure. There's no one single organization that's responsible for improving the innovation index. Someone keeps track of it, but everyone needs to be sort of engaged continuously to make sure we're all on the same page. So our organizational kind of strategies fall within the strategic direction of the national priorities, and that's where the major link, and it's very critical for us to be able to appreciate. Now, one way we've designed this and the way we think about it at the firm is to kind of link what we think about the strategy and the national strategy and our industry or organization strategy to the balanced scorecard approach. The balanced scorecard approach is a nice, simple way of thinking about how might you think about the strategic directions and what do you need to change to be able to achieve the ultimate strategic goal that you have in mind. So most businesses, non-profits, would look at the balanced scorecard in 4 major areas. A financial element, whether it's revenues or donations or philanthropic grants or whatever you want. And then the next one will be your clients or stakeholders. You want to improve, maintain, expand. And then you have the operational element, how you do things, right? So for higher education, this could be the institutional standards and how you improve those and how you change those to more dynamic models. And finally, how do you create talent within your organization? All of that professional training, all of that professional development, how does it lead? Now, in the balanced scorecard approach, there's a lot of linkages up and down. You need financials, but you need clients to support those financials. You need improved operations to improve your client offering, and so on. Excuse me. So how can we use the balanced scorecard approach to create a parallel kind of example of where we would want to link to the national strategy? So what we've done is, instead of simply looking at your finance and clients and whatnot, we're starting to look at the pillars on the verticals, or the rows rather, on the horizontals of the vision, and start to ask ourselves, where do we place ourselves as an organization? If we're going to create a strategy that's going to link to 2040, then we start to ask ourselves, where are we relevant in the 4 pillars? Is it going to be the people and society, education, health, welfare, so on? Is it economy, improving the competitiveness, improving the sophistication? Is it the environment? Is that where my footprint is going to be? Or is it the institutional side, whether it's supporting the institution or whatnot? Now, being relevant to any of those pillars has to also be linked to your organizational activities, right? Now, here's where you need to take a step back and think beyond just simply a higher education and ask yourself, how do I have cross-cutting relevance between, for example, the people element and the human capital development in society? How can I have change in the process? How do I create reasonable, sensible, engaging, fruitful partnerships and collaborations? What kind of products or services I am going to provide that will enrich the economy, the environment, the institutions, and whatnot. So this matrix borrows from the idea of the balanced scorecard, but really focuses on creating cross-cutting themes or strategic direction for your organization that are based on what 2040 is. So let me give you examples of this. I've picked up 3 examples here. The first of which is linking the people element, the education, as we looked at the subcategories there, we had the strategic goals or the national priorities, to human capital. And you might start to work there and ask, what does 2040 expect society to be in 20 years' time? Talented, skillful, dynamic? Then we start to work on what our organization can provide. Now here I should say that not all organizations can hit all of the different marks, and you shouldn't have to. You need to find a niche within your strategy, within your capabilities as well, that you can provide these offers or solutions at the national level. You could choose to be placed in the economy element, in the labor market element, and start to provide products, in this case services, such as educational services that help improve. Could be vocational programs that are completely new. You could provide different type of degrees that are more dynamic. You could change the model how you deliver these as well. That could be a process change rather than simply just a service change as well. You could collaborate with institutions that you didn't collaborate before, or collaborate better with institutions that you work with today, right? Whether these are regulatory institutions such as the ministry, such as the Oman Accreditation Association, or local or international for that matter, and you start to work more on that. Now, some of you might be thinking, hang on, but this is what we do. This is what we do. This is our bread and butter. That's exactly it. But how do you elevate it from being within your organization to impacting the stakeholders that you wish to impact in society, that you start to click with Vision 2040, right? Why is it important to be able to link that? Because the outcomes of what you do in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years need to be matched at the national scale. We need to be producing the right type of innovation, the relevant type of research, the right type of skills that Oman needs to be able to do that. Now, if we don't have that link, it'll be business as usual, and we will be detached from this whole idea of national priorities and Vision 2040. So let me give you an example of how this might work. So you've managed to map your process and you've decided, hang on, we are relevant in these 3 or 4 areas. The word relevant or relevance is very, very important, because not all of the activities that you think you can have impact are core activities. You need to decide whether whatever you're going to be focusing on your strategy is a core element or a non-core element. And that's how much resources you're going to apply to each one of them. What do I mean by core and non-core? Most higher education institutions are involved in 3 major things: teaching and learning, research, and community service. But let's be honest, most of the time the teaching and learning and research take priority over the community. But they're all core business. They're all part of your core. But you could be doing something even more by enabling other stakeholders. The entrepreneurship element, some universities and colleges take it upon themselves to be part and parcel of this process of development of entrepreneurship. Others would provide support services, or simply, in some cases, they will be on the periphery. That's fine. Not all of us can have the resources to provide the same support or the same type of resources. So what we do is we prioritize. Where we are most relevant, that becomes the first priority for our strategy. So you ask yourself, what does my organization do? Yes, we are a higher education organization, or we are in a higher education business. But hang on, are you a design college? Are you a technology college or university? Are you an arts college or university? So it really depends where you are. We can't all do the same thing or duplicate what we do. Then the next question is, how relevant is our work to the big vision 2040? Well, if we're talking about skills and talents and innovation, there are some organizations that are closer to innovation than others. Some do more research than others. Some do more creative arts than others. The next thing is, where are we most relevant? Some of us are better at institutional connections. Take, for example, a college of law. Law colleges are more relevant to institutional improvements and governance and whatnot, while, for example, technology is more effective when it comes to people and economy. However, technology is also relevant in the environment, so you need to select where you are. So I'll take the example of higher educational institutions generally and say one of the key pillars that is relevant to most higher education institutions is the people, society, education, health, and whatnot. Right, where are we going to place ourselves? Where are we going to focus on our strategy? I've picked one of them under education, high quality education and societal partnerships. Meaning we're going to work on this element, but we're going to try and link this to whatever is necessary for Vision 2040 to be realized at some stage or the other. So to do this, we might be very specific about our strategic goal and say we would like to increase our industry research collaborations, say by 50%, and this will lead us to achieving the strategic goal of societal partnerships. I'm sure many of you have already incorporated this in your organizations. One way or the other, we're looking at partnerships. But let me ask, how many people have actually achieved those levels? What kind of output have you produced? What impact has it created for society? It is not simply about having it in your strategy, but measuring that impact not only on your organization, for your alumni, for your faculty, or for your organization, but for the broader stakeholders, society, and what impact that has done. Now, it is not very healthy to expect that every single strategic goal is going to have societal impact. But if we take 30, 40, 60 organizations working in the same direction, that is going to create impact, and not simply by one organization. Hence, collaboration is very, very important. Partnerships are extremely important, not only with your stakeholders, but within the higher education sort of realm, if you like. Right? This is to kind of bring us back to how are we going to get this thing, the sort of links done, and how do we improve on how we do things. I'm sure you're all well aware of the SMART goals being specific, measurable, applicable, relevant, and timely. But the reason I put this here is just a quick reminder that when we think of these higher goals, sometimes placing goals on visions is a bit of a risky business, because visions are for a very long term, 20 years, 15 years, and whatnot. And we could miss the mark from day one. The pandemic has shown us that our starting point today was more challenging from when we set the vision itself. How are we going to be able to achieve those goals? Well, our goals need to be able to change with time and adjust with realistic sort of expectations, if you like. But more importantly, we should be mindful that when we set our goals, we need to be realistic. I've seen some goals set that are unrealistic in the capacity of your organization, right? Improving research this, increasing intake this, changing the finance model this. We need to be mindful of the challenges, and we should not be dismayed if our goals don't seem to be ridiculously aspirational, because sometimes achieving achievable goals and building on that is better incrementally than trying to reach for the stars and not getting there. And finally, I would like to remind all of us that strategic planning, whether you're connecting to the vision or doing in your organizations, is a circular process. You plan, you apply, you execute, you measure, you evaluate, you review, and you go back to the planning. So it is not set in stone. 2040 is not set in stone. Your organizational strategies for higher education should not be stuck in stone or sort of etched in stone, if you like. It will change, it has to change. And that's why those 5-year plans could be our markers or milestones, whether we're achieving that objective or not, whether we are there or not, and how might we readjust or recalibrate, if you like. Thank you very much for listening to my thoughts. I hope I've created some sort of debate in your mind that we would like to hear more questions from you when we get to the Q&A section.
Thank you so much, Your Highness. Such a very informative presentation, and and it was an eye opener for us to think about different directions for higher education. Our first question is that we are offering now as higher education institutes a mandatory course on entrepreneurship. What are other strategies that could be implemented to entice entrepreneurship among our graduates? In other words, we're not seeing a huge effectiveness of the course that we're implementing. What are other strategies that we can really entice our students to get more involved with entrepreneurial work?
Well, one of the things we noted when I sat with the committee, some of my colleagues, and we designed the framework for that course back in 2014, we were trying to create templates that colleges and universities could design their own spin on it and add value. And some universities and colleges have managed to do that through experiential learning. So competitions like Injaz Oman and other competitions have been very effective in taking students from the theoretical class, which they find boring or irrelevant to what they do. And I've heard these comments at Sultan Qaboos University, and perhaps you've heard it at your college, Doctora, and many other colleges, where they say, listen, this is not relevant to me. I am, I'm doing English literature. Why am I doing entrepreneurship? It's not relevant. When these same students might go through programs that challenge them to compete, to be creative, that's when they feel that they could do something with the skills they pick up. They don't have to be entrepreneurs necessarily, but they are exposed to programs that are experiential, that are challenged, they can see results, and they're challenged based on critical thinking. What we can't do in a classroom or on a screen
Internet connection.
The last couple of years, what we find is when they're engaged, they're able to have that effect of understanding responsibility, failure, teamwork, making decisions, taking responsibility for those decisions. And if I may reflect again on Injaz Oman, because I've been close to the program, I've been on the jury, I've seen the success that has been done. And what we noticed that the perspective is creating learning process that's going to achieve the results.
I think it has to be stopped, and then we resume. Are you back, Dr. with us?
Okay.
Sorry, Ms. Ala, I can't hear you very well.
Sorry, Doctor, the last answer, we were not able to hear you properly. It was disconnecting from your side.
All right, let me try again then. Our connection is. So I was saying that I hope you can hear me well. If you do, just give me a thumbs up, please. Right. So the key to entrepreneurship education, as we've seen it, and when we've done our research at the time of creating the framework or the guideline for the course, was experiential learning. If you're not going to experience it through competitions, through competing against others, then it's going to be a bit tough for you to achieve the results that you want.
Would you recommend perhaps additional workshops, presentations that we can engage students with, perhaps with the local organizations like Riyada?
Dr. Amuna, I think he is not able to hear you. There is something about his internet connection is
Said Adam, do you want to leave and rejoin again? Okay. Okay, شفناك.
Do you hear me, Doctora?
لا, it's a weak connection. I think let's try to okay.
ايوه تسمعيني دكتورة؟
اوكي دلوقتي سمعتك تفضل.
اوكي. So I was saying that experiential learning is a critical element in entrepreneurship. And without that, we cannot. No.
There's still a weak connection مستمعينا كويس.
Yeah, apologies, Doctora. Seems my internet today is acting up شوي.
That's okay.
Is it any better now?
Yes, yes. أول ما بتسألني بتبقى perfect.
Okay, we'll try one more time to see if this works. All right. So two words, experiential learning, right? That's how we do this, right? If we get the experience done, all the textbook teaching classroom is not going to work as effectively. So Tam, is it better now, Doctora? I'm just trying to figure out.
والله the minute you ask a question يبقى perfect and then gets weak again.
like when you start to answer, it is starting to just go away, just like now.
All right, let me see if I can do something here. All right, is it getting any better?
And now we can hear you. Okay. Yeah, let's have another current.
Let me try without the video for a second and see if that helps.
Okay.
All right, I hope you can hear me now, Doctora.
Yes, we can hear you.
So I was saying experiential learning is perhaps one of the key drivers for entrepreneurship. If you don't get out of the classroom, if you don't try, if you don't set up competitions, if you don't set up that sort of comparative element to your peers, how you work together and versus each other, that's going to be very difficult. Most experiences usually focus on getting people to try out things like budgeting, running a business, designing, all of those sorts of things that are very critical. So some would believe that higher education incubators could be a key role in doing this, student company style. There are a number of competitions, as you're well aware, things like Injaz Oman and others, campus companies have been done. Other universities have had specialized entrepreneurship centers. Some of these are cliche, unfortunately, but many have managed to at least get students engaged. But again, doing it within your organization is not enough. You need to connect to other organizations. You need to be able to get out and compete. And that's how you can create more of this trial and error before they go to the real world and make costly mistakes as well.
Okay. I think this answers our question. My second question for Your Highness is, what are Your Highness thoughts on the changes that should be implemented to academic programs to ensure sustainability and viability in the market?
Well, at least from my perspective, from what I hear from people in industry, businesses are looking for a certain set of skills that they can develop while people are working for them. Now, they're creating their own schools of excellence and centers of excellence, but they're doing exactly what you're doing at universities, whether it's at the business end or whatnot. But what they're looking for are doses rather than long-term engagements of continuous education. They do it in doses and modules as they develop. So they've developed their graduate programs, they've developed their special internship programs, but they're often looking at the same skills that could be developed before these students get to them or graduates. So shorter programs, more specific programs, vocational programs that create specific skills that people can continuously reskill themselves. It's a waste of time for someone to go back to university for 3 to 4 years if they can do it in a year or two and pick up the necessary skills. Those who would like to take a little bit of a longer break from work, they can choose different types of things. We see, for example, especially at the postgraduate level, we see that people prefer the flexibility of picking up modules and putting them together at a later point in time and get a certification. I know people, for example, who do things like ACCAs and chartered accounting and CPAs. It takes them 2 to 2.5 years to do these modules. It does not disrupt their life, though. They still can work and then work. In the arts and design, we're looking for people to be able to include skills as well. So again, the flexibility in the. Sorry, Doctora?
الصوت مش واضح. It's deteriorating again.
Yeah, apologies again, Doctora. It seems that I'm unable to get the internet working as well as it should. All right, is it any better now, Doctora?
Yeah, it's better now.
Right, so flexibility, especially for reskilling, we found that during the pandemic, a lot of people lost their jobs and need to be reskilled and move from one job to the other. They cannot afford to go back to university. They need specialized training programs that could certify them, right? And this is where the role of the ministries and the associations of accreditation that need to play a role in this. And obviously, you know, that's a tough job to ask for someone to change overnight, you know, but you know, it's a process that needs to be changed. The mode of delivery needs to be changed as well. We can't depend on only in class. There's a wider audience. In fact, if anything, you'll find that many of the students that can go to universities can be poached by online degrees that are credible today than they were, say, 5 years ago or even before the pandemic. We cannot wait for the old model of we build it and they will come. We need to find where the potential clients are, the students are, what they want. We need to listen to them. We talk to industry more than we talk to students. We never ask students, what do you want from your degree, right? That model needs to change. We need to listen more to our students and what they want, while listening also to their employers or would-be employers.
Okay, let's move to the third question. As being part of the governing boards on several institutions, what do you think will be the role of the authoritative bodies such as the Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation, the QE, in shaping the quality of the education system? So cascading from your previous answer to the second question.
Right. I think if any changes to come into higher education, it needs to come from the higher education institutes themselves. Regulators usually find it more difficult to be malleable because they're governed by rules and regulations and laws and standards. So one of the things that higher education institutions can do is feed the change agenda to the relevant institutions that govern the industry. The trends that are seen today, we've been talking about jobs of the future for the last 5 to 6 years. Now, what has changed in Oman, for example, to be more specific in that area, it's very difficult to say. We see these international numbers and comparisons, but to be honest with you, if you go out to the market and ask, what are jobs of the future? How are they being applied in the market? Very few companies will be able to tell you something useful. Many of them are still using draconian and archaic systems of job descriptions, HR systems, employment systems, and you can see that when you look at all of these application invitations. You know, there's a long list of things that you have to do as an applicant, but very little things that tell you they'll do for you. The experience required for jobs that, to be honest with you, need more skill than experience as well. Most of the time, we are using a lot of things that you know, we're comfortable with, and we're unable to change the way we do it. I think the higher education institutes are going to be the drivers of change by listening to their students, to their stakeholders, and reflect that agenda and the need for it to reflect. Let me give you an example of that. We are coming up to the students applying. There's about 45,000 students applying for universities and colleges in this August. Their options are highly dependent on what the Center for Universal, or was it Qabul al-Muwahhad, tells them is available. Right now, one word could change your career path in the next 5 years. If it says data analytics versus big data, how do you make out the difference as an 18-year-old, whether I want to do this or that at college X or university Y? So there's a lot that can be done in redefining the sort of vocations, redefining, and that's been already done there, but we need flexibility. We need to change it at a moment's notice with our affiliates, within our organizations, with OAAA, with all of these organizations need to be able to adapt very, very quickly and not simply say, listen, this is what's been done, we continue to do it again and again.
We're losing a connection, Stain. We're losing a connection.
I'm sorry, Doctora. Again, you're losing the best comments, Haliyan, Doctora.
We're doing our best. We're doing our best.
I'm sorry. It seems my internet is the one that is causing. I'll blame it on my internet provider.
I just wanted to follow up on your answer from what I heard, Jana. Don't you think systems with frameworks للمنستري and as well as of course the OAAA QE is going to change after the pandemic? We just went through a pilot study, us and Majan College and other colleges, through a pilot study that was totally online, and I'm sure that the standards themselves are going to be affected with the online platforms, and then the institutions targeting the blended learning and the hybrid learning rather than the face-to-face. So don't you think that this is going to affect the framework and the system, the standards that we're going to be evaluated against?
Absolutely, Doctora. Absolutely. I think it isn't just simply about the type of or modes or processes of learning as well, but even our learning outcomes that we hope to achieve through these changes, right? We need to ask ourselves if innovation, talent, and skills is the target, then all of our frameworks need to work towards creating those kind of skills and talent and whatnot. Right? I see you smiling, so you're not hearing me very well, Doctora.
Oh, no. Do you want to take a second to count?
Wallahi, the thing is, wherever I go, it seems that this network issue is problematic at the moment.
Now we can hear you perfectly.
I'm not sure what. Okay. All right. So Doctora, I would say much of this framework is going to change. It shouldn't be changed because of the pandemic effects, but the lessons learned that are required to understand is flexibility in the system, adaptability in the system. The learning model is changing across across the world, and we believe that whatever trends happen around the world come a bit later in Oman, but they are coming to us. And they're coming to us in the form of a shakeup in the educational system. Many of the unviable models in Oman, the copycat scenarios, you create a college, I create a college, you open a specialization, I will do the same. Sort of the commercial model of education is going to be shaken up because it's not viable, it's not sustainable. What's going to be sustainable are the models that the framework supports dynamic changes that are going to be very quick. Within one academic year, I can change my program, I can change what I offer, how I assess it, and whatnot. But if I'm going to be stuck in systems that cannot change as fast as I need them to, what we're doing is we're dragging the whole system back. I would call that institutional drag, where the institutions that govern the sector or the organizations, such as higher education, might pull back because of bureaucracies, because of denial of these changes that come through, or in some cases, the lack of capacity to be able to keep up with that. It's not easy to regulate. And I should say this, policy is always difficult in any sector, in any social economic aspect.
Okay, one more question. I'm sorry, we're having these technical issues, but يعني حرام not to take advantage of your presence with us. You talked about measuring the societal impact. Can you explain this a little bit further, perhaps with examples? How can we measure the societal impact?
Right. So impact generally of education isn't one that we see immediately, right? We have those significant changes, but usually they happen within a generation, maybe once or twice, because we've changed the system. So how do we check societal impact? One of the things that we can look at is whether we are, for example, from a business point of view, we are helping businesses become more sophisticated by creating a stream of talent that introduces new ideas to businesses, how they do things, how they innovate, how they change things. Now, some of the measures are there that we've seen in these international measures, where we see more people inclined to start up businesses, more people changing the way they manage, how they interact with the environment, more people engaging in civil society that creates value within themselves. Those people need organizations to support them, such as higher education, whether they skill themselves, whether they improve talent, whether they create value. Now, when I talk about societal impact, it depends what stakeholders you're talking about. If you're creating more employable output from your universities and colleges, that's one impact. Employability improves. If you are going to create a more conscious society, then your creative and knowledge output is impacting society. Now, you know this nexus in education, higher education, research versus teaching, right? And most of the time when we think of research, none of us actually reads even our colleagues' research, right? We just want to get published and we want to get that high index and we want to get an award for it. But no one reads our output. How does society become better knowledge, better educated without that input? Let me give you an example. Today, we have the vaccine conundrum where people say, we want to get vaccinated, we don't want to get vaccinated. There's a lot of false information, there's a lot of accurate information. But where is the role of academics and institutions, whether it's communication, whether it's medicine, whether it's any type of relevant field that is adding value to this conversation in Oman? Let's take Oman specifically, right? We don't see the impact. How are we going to impact society if we are considered the consultants, we are considered the experts in our field, whatever field that is? Where are we from this conversation? Most of us think this is not our case. We are not relevant to this case, so we do not add value in it. So I think there is great room for higher education to impact society, but the impact will be felt differently. I'll take the College of Design and the efforts that you have done in the past few years in engaging artists and society, right? In your field, that is very relevant. Now, what is happening in technology with the colleges of technology? Excuse me. There are some colleges, for example, Geotech, that is introducing 3D building with concrete as part of their partnerships. Now, the technology is not new, it has been around, but that impact will be seen in society if they can help change the building regulations, help build in remote areas, help the environment, reduce waste, change the construction industry. this will happen not today, not tomorrow, but surely in a few years' time, that impact will be felt. So that's the kind of societal impact I'm talking about.
Thank you. I'd like really to thank Your Highness today for joining us. It's always fascinating how you conclude your investigations and your studies with practical implementation for the higher education sector. We have seen implications of several economic studies that you have discussed previously, with specific guidelines for institutions to include in plans and objectives. And I think we have attended several of the ISRA Inside stories, and it's always really amazing how you can tie these economic studies with the implications for higher educations and give us guidelines and tips on how to include in our future directives results from these studies. I really want to thank you on behalf of the association for joining us today. From your presentations and the follow-up questions, I think we can conclude a couple of points. The first being, of course, the strategic planning should be aligned with the national directives through rigorous mapping, with realistic key performance indicators to ensure program sustainability and viability, and of course, the employability of our graduates. The second main point, I think, that came out of today's discussion is that the authoritative bodies of the higher education sector need to work together on reshaping the education system to match the market future directions and future demands. I think, and perhaps through the association, we can also conduct workshops and continue on our webinar series topics that we have consulted with the sector, and this was actually one of the highest topics that the sector asked us to conduct such a presentation so that the higher education institutes are aware of Vision 2040 and how they can integrate it with their strategic plans. Thank you for sharing with us today your thoughts and your ideas. I would like just to take a second to announce our next webinar. It's going to be on student assessments on the online platform. Also, Dr. Jamal, my colleague, Dr. Jamal Azzi, is getting the conference project back on track again. And hopefully we will have our conference on internationalization in higher education during fall semester of next academic year, inshallah. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to remind our members, this is actually Professor Taqi Zorour. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us today. But I would like to remind everyone, please, to pay your membership fees in order for the association to continue our support and organize such engagements with the national and international experts. Thank you very much, Your Highness, again, for joining us today. Assalamu alaikum.
عليك شكرا جزيلا. شكرا دكتورة.
تفضل.
Thank you very much for having me and all the. You know, I hope you hear me better now. Thank you very much for having me. I hope my thoughts were useful. I was trying to provoke sort of those and thoughts. I always thank the hard work that you do, because specifically I work very closely with you. And mashallah alayki, always encouraging debate and conversation. It's been a pleasure presenting to your colleagues at the association and those who attended. at the end of the day, we are working all towards a national objective of getting Oman to the level of advanced countries in the next couple of decades, inshallah. But the hard work starts right now in these difficult circumstances. But having said that, there's always room for improvement. Alhamdulillah, we're seeing good progress towards the ultimate target. So again, thank you very much for having me, and I wish you all the success, inshallah, in your future endeavors and projects.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Highness. Assalamu alaikum.
شكرا دكتورة. الله يحفظك. عليكم السلام.
Juliet.